There could be activity, as there is now, for new plants, but no CO2 price that would be meaningful for existing plants. This limits the amount of retirements that happen over time and for coal. And of course it limits any price manifesting itself until the late 2020s at a more modest level. And then again, on the opposite side, the clean scenario is one that assumes faster adoption of a policy, either driven by EPA or legislative action, such that there is a market price in 2018 and a price that accelerates up above $50 real by the end of the study period, which is starting to approach $100 in nominal terms. In that scenario, there are more retirements. There happen to be more retirements nationwide in the eastern half of the country, which has far more coal capacity, more uncontrolled coal capacity that's clearly at risk and uneconomic. But even in the west, the analysis does assume 2 additional major plants would retire under this scenario in the 2020 time period. Those would be the Navajo and Intermountain facilities, exiting the market earlier than they otherwise would have, and opening up additional demand for other resources in the power sector. As I mentioned, the higher CO2 prices do also spur additional renewable development. So in this particular scenario, you've got 25 to 35% of the energy throughout the western footprint coming from renewables, and you have a far lower chunk from coal. And again, the balancing element here, aside from some of the nuclear capacity that does exist, is natural gas. So the natural gas capacity and generation is more competitive in the clean scenario than the cheap scenario. So I'll pause there with the high level and open it up again to questions.
Yes, Steve. So EPA rules are typically final in 2016, or 2015 rather, with state final plans in 2016. Seems like with those go into effect, there's going to be some anticipatory activity around carbon pricing. And I'm wondering why, even in the clean scenario, you have the reference case, but mostly in the clean scenario, you're not seeing a price on carbon until 2018.
Okay, the question is looking at the schedule now for the EPA rulemaking, and the premise is EPA rules in 2015, state rules in 2016. Why isn't there any anticipatory activity through that rulemaking process so that the impact doesn't start showing until 2019, actually 2018 in the clean case even.
Right. So even in the clean case, when we're looking at EPA rulemaking, there is an assumption that basically you're going to have a lot of these rules fought out in the courts before they actually go into effect. And so that delay until 2018 is accounting for the legal process around the coming rules to play out, or anticipating other legislative action that could take place during that time to not actually see a hard and fast rule in place and implemented until the 2018 time period. Because even if no legal action takes place or there's no legislative action, any state implementation plan likely wouldn't take effect until a couple years after the final proposal, as you see in the other EPA rulemakings, like say with the mercury and air toxic standards, which don't take effect until 2015, even though they were finalized in 2011, 2012.
So follow up on that?
Yeah, without responding to the second part, as far as the first part goes, there's a presumption that courts are going to stay EPA's rules to keep them from going into effect. And I think that's an unlikely outcome. It's possible. But unless the court stays those rules, those rules are going to go forward as of 2050. So I think the notion that the presumption that a court is going to stop EPA's rules from going forward while it's being litigated, I'm not sure that's a fair assumption.
Okay, the comment is just basically a disagreement that lag will happen, that as things work through their process, that we'll meet an earlier schedule in terms of implementation of rules. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, it's specifically related to the notion that litigation is going to delay this.
Okay, the disagreement is around the premise that it will be delayed by litigation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that it's a fair comment. As Chris outlined, though, our expectation in this case is that either litigation or, frankly, the mechanics of having to implement the rule after it's been put in place are going to take a few years. And we've seen that experience in California. We've seen that experience, as Chris referenced, with the mercury air toxics rule. And although the rule may come out in the 2016 or end of 15 time period, our expectation, even in this case, is that before a meaningful price manifests itself, there's a few years to work out, whether it be legal battles or purely an implementation program for all the rules to actually come into force.
Okay, any other questions on the CO2? Okay, I'm not seeing any more in the room, so I think we can move to the final slide on here, the electric. Go ahead, Pat.
Okay, thank you. So what we've got here on the final slide are electric power pricing comparisons. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the concept here, what we have is $1 per megawatt hour wholesale power price. That's what this is intended to capture. And although PNM is not situated within a competitive ISO market, like you may see in California or Texas or the eastern half of the country, there are transactions and bilateral agreements that occur at benchmarked wholesale power prices for the transaction of electricity. And this data set is used in the IRP process to look at what those prices might be, to look at various portfolios that may have the option to buy power from the market or sell excess power to the market. And as I referenced early on, what we've done to come up with these price projections is a combination of all the inputs we've just talked about, along with a simulation of the entire Western Interconnect on a plant-by-plant basis, building up the competitive stack of power plants against demand every hour. And this is really where a lot of the integration comes into play. So we've talked about gas prices, we've talked about CO2 prices, and then we've talked about the impacts on the power sector for both demand growth and technology response. So what happens with the coal capacity, what happens with new renewables, and all of these get integrated based on the policy outcomes and the economics. So in the reference case, what we have are, again, based on market forwards and the CO2 policy assumption of 2020, and an assessment of what's currently ongoing in the power market regionally in the West and locally to New Mexico. We have announced coal retirements and an expectation for additional retirements over time driven by economics. We've got a series of about 3,000 megawatts likely to leave the system throughout WEC, the Western region, by 2017, climbing all the way up to about 8,000 megawatts leaving by the end of the study period. On the demand growth front, we've got an expectation for between 0.5% and 1.5% per year load growth throughout the region, and that flattens over time due to the expectation for additional demand-side management and efficiency measures. And overall, the combination of those various elements in the power sector lead to very moderately increasing prices in real terms as gas prices increase, as the carbon price comes into the market, and as the market's dynamics change. And you'll see that in the line graph shown in nominal terms on the slide that you're looking at. General price increases from the mid $30 per megawatt hour range up above 60, and then longer term above 100 in nominal terms, and of course in real dollars those are lower. On the cheap scenario, you should think about the various inputs we've just indicated: lower carbon prices, lower gas prices, driving lower power prices, because the variable cost of generation in the wholesale power markets will be lower. We have less stringent environmental policy, so there are fewer retirements and fewer renewables in response to policy and economic conditions. What we do see in this case, though, are the prevalence for some price spikes in the outer years, especially during the summer months, because this scenario has not built in the demand response, the solar penetration that some of the others have, and as a result you can see some slight convergence with the reference case in the outer years. And then finally, the clean scenario does have the highest wholesale power market prices over time. Again, the simple way to think about it would be higher natural gas prices, higher CO2 prices, and that drives higher variable costs of operation for your plants throughout the system. However, in response to those market conditions and the environmental policy assumptions, this case does have the lowest demand growth, Western Interconnect system-wide, actually going to declining load over time due to the expected penetration of large amounts of DSM, demand-side management measures, and increasing efficiency of all end-use electric consumption items. And this also has the highest retirement outlook on the coal front. I believe I referenced the Navajo and Intermountain retirements embedded in here. And it also has a lot of renewable replacement. So this is where the renewable technologies, wind, solar, and some of the storage would integrate in to have a 30% or 25 to 35%, depending on the location, renewable penetration. So although wholesale power market prices are higher, they end up being mitigated in the out years by less demand growth and more renewable generation. So I think that, again, covers the overview, and happy to take questions.
Yeah, Bob.
The number that's being represented on these charts, is it representative of just an energy product, a firm product, or is it an average of across the board of all the different products that may be on the market during these various years?
Okay, the question is whether the pricing that comes out of the model, and you know, we're looking at this screen where we've summarized the electric by averaging things in their annual basis. I think it's, if you look on your page handout on page 11, so then that's more reflective of the prices that came out of the modeling. But then the question is, on that basis, are these prices meant to stand for a firm wholesale product or a average product, or is it on peak, off peak, that type of? If you could just characterize the prices that we're looking at on page 11 of the page handout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good question. This is designed to be an energy-only product, but an average around-the-clock type summary of the price. So there could be different products: a peak product, off-peak product. There could be a need, if you're contracting, of course, to pay for capacity value, perhaps, if a counterparty wanted to be compensated for capacity or to firm up a resource. So that type of cost would not be embedded in here. What's embedded in here is an energy-only, around-the-clock type average of what the clearing price in the wholesale market would demand for energy across each of the scenarios.
I think we have a follow-up on that.
Yeah. And this goes maybe not directly to PACE, but P&M. In developing scenarios, at an energy-only product curve. Did PNM develop, in essence, a market basket of products that were evaluated in the plan or are going to be evaluated in any plan or scenario?
Yeah, the question is, within the P&M modeling, then how do we take these price curves and use them in scenario development? So I'll start with an answer on that, and if we want to get more detailed, Shane's the guy who's doing it all day, every day, so we'll rely on his expertise too if we need to. But the first step through in P&M modeling, and this goes back to an old establishment of how we should look at resource planning, is we are looking at serving our system demand with our resources. We're not trying to justify addition of any resources by looking at the impact of the market on that. So the first step through, how are we using the electric prices, is we're looking at the gas prices and the CO2 prices and using the electric prices as kind of a benchmark for us in terms of, does that make sense? So then as we move through with the resource planning, one of the things we could do is a scenario check, is make the market available to the model, and so then we'll see more of an interplay there where you're buying and selling electricity as a way to balance out supply and demand, and maybe taking advantage of market opportunities and lowering costs. Does that answer your question?
It starts to answer it. I guess my question goes a piece further. Is that going to be is to take those various assumptions and market basket options that are sitting out there into account?
That's what I was trying to say, is that the starting point is we are more or less required to not look at that as an opportunity. But that's something we can add in the process, and through public advisory comment that's obvious that there's a value to that, we can take that on and try to work that into our plan here going forward.
Do we have the assumptions about future pricing for wind and solar in particular that went into developing this chart? Because if those resources are approaching grid parity now, it seems like this differential for power can disappear pretty quickly through the reference to. So I'm wondering what the assumptions were for renewable pricing.
Okay, the question is just what are the assumed prices for renewable technology builds in the future, with the goal of being able to look at those prices and understanding why there is a gap in the electric market prices, especially in the long run, with the premise being that if renewables are at grid parity, the gap should shrink.
Okay, well, from PACE's point of view, we do have a series of assumptions for the all-in costs for those renewable technologies, wind and solar being the biggest penetrators in the market here. And we analyze that on a dollar per kilowatt basis. This is one of the items we can follow up with in tabular form if needed, and I know these costs are actually quite consistent with those that P&M has published on the website that I think Pat was referencing earlier in the meeting. At a high level, the wind costs are assumed to be in the low 2,000 per kilowatt range. That's an all-in capital cost number. We would then amortize that over a life of a project to come up with your long-term dollar per megawatt hour type prices. And you're right, as the costs in the market go up, that wind price does become more competitive, and especially in the higher case, it's one of the reasons why there's more wind in the clean scenario. Same with solar. We have different levels of utility scale or small scale solar. at various pricing levels. Again, the utility scale solar is down into the 2,000 to 3,000 per kilowatt type price range, and we do expect declines in that cost over time. And in regions of the Southwest right now, it is competitive and expected to become more competitive over time. There are still subsidies associated with wind and solar developments. So if those production or investment tax credits go away, which we do assume over time, the competitiveness decreases a little bit. But overall, the point is fair that, especially in the higher price case, there is quite a bit more penetration of renewable technologies because the costs of building and developing that technology and entering it into the market are more competitive. So there is some price convergence because of that, but the overall system is not transformed so much that some of the gas and even coal capacity is completely removed from the price setting mechanism. So in higher CO2 and gas regimes, you still are going to have higher wholesale power prices during times when those technologies are marginal. But I think the overall answer is that we do have cost curves embedded for the new technologies, especially on solar. We expect continued declines, and those costs do become very competitive with some of the market prices embedded here, especially in the case where the market prices are higher.
Okay, Rob, you have a question?
Yeah, well, just for the public perspective, it might be helpful if we're going to look out to the future and assume an escalation of gas and carbon pricing, you know, in a way of reality to deal with the sustainability issues that are before us. I mean, you should also have a curve for the public that would show how to pay for that through conventional resources. If, for example, you were doing coal sequestration or whatever, I think you would see a curve that would be considerably higher than the green curve if you weren't using the renewable technology to address it. And I just think it needs to be visualized in a sense so that people can, or characterized to see what the conventional solution to the escalation of gas and carbon pricing would be.
Okay, I think I'll summarize what I heard. And you know, the carbon curves that we have developed today are more or less to keep the market in balance type concept, and it's achieved by adding renewables and gas in the models. What the request is for a comparison of other things that could be considered that would meet the carbon reduction goals, but maybe don't show up in the model because of their apparent cost or the development of the technology to date. So the example is compare what cost it would be if, instead of just trying to balance the model using economic forces, if the solution is carbon capture and sequestration on fossil burning units. Is that a fair summary of what you said?
Yeah.
So we'll look into that and see what we can do on that. I mean, the difficulty is, again, development of the technology at the moment, so it's kind of hard to predict price on that type of thing. But we'll see what we can do.
I'd be curious, piece of perspective, though, what would be the projected cost of conventional solutions to the reality of higher CO2 prices?
Okay, they've asked for your perspective on how using a conventional, or I'd say like a fossil resource with some form of carbon capture and sequestration, how that would affect the results.
Okay, yeah, there's certainly a lot of moving parts there, but on the sequestration and capture technology, generally speaking, on a capital cost basis, that's probably going to be about 3 times the costs of some of the renewable technologies I mentioned. So that would be, again, on a capital cost basis, probably on the order of, call it $6,000 a kW. But of course, that type of technology, if it was commercialized, would be able to produce more output than the intermittency of some of the solar and wind technologies. So on a levelized basis, that disparity would come down. But I do think what we're seeing now is that the wind and solar technologies are more cost effective than some of the more speculative combustion capture and sequestration technologies for coal. You then, of course, have the other options that are more conventional on gas, which, depending on the gas price and the CO2 price and the incentives for renewables, may still be competitive. But we can certainly work with the P&M team if there are different ways that would be helpful to show those various cost buildups on an apples-to-apples basis.
That would be really important to me. Okay, so we'll see what we can do on those lines. And Tom, you have a question?
Yeah, I had a couple comments on that question. I just would ask that from session to session, that try to keep the slides consistent, both in terms of content versus nominal dollars, and the set of slides that are being discussed. I like the slides that you handed out Tuesday better than the slides that went through today. That's my personal preference, because they're more focused on the input data to the strategy model, much less general background. If, for example, the electric power pricing slide is a New Mexico power price that shows more detail, shows peak differences. They'll discuss that with you guys. So those are my comments, and then the specific question relates to the coal price. We handed out a coal price slide last week, last Tuesday, and it's a Powder River Basin price. But as I understand it, the main coal price that would be about the principal at San Juan or Four Corners. But well, with either, and I think the coal prices are mine now. They're not really related to Powder River, and the coal contracts are being negotiated. So I'm wondering what is actually going into the model as opposed to.
Okay, the question after the comment, and the comment is that I think you like the PACE presentation better than what I put together here.
I'm sorry.
Then the next is just why do we have a Powder River Basin price slide in the PACE presentation, and I think the answer to that lies in that there's two models going on here. The first model, which is what the inputs to that model are being described in this, is PACE's model that developed the overall curve. So if you're looking at wet electricity prices, Powder River Basin coal is a very important input. If you're looking at P&M's IRP modeling, then Powder River Basin coal is not an important input. What's the important input there is the price we're paying for coal at the mine mount resources on our system. So that's the difference. Why Powder River Basin is here is because it is an important input for the work that PACE has done. We're taking the PACE work as an input to what we're doing in our strategist modeling, and you're correct, within strategist, the only coal prices that we're putting in there are Four Corners and San Juan.
I guess the general question or request would be somewhere if you could itemize a comprehensive list of input data or input forecasts. We're getting bits and pieces and glimpses of things in these meetings, but it would be very helpful to be able to sit back outside of this room and think about what's actually going on in the model so that we can ask further information.
Okay, just to summarize the comment, the request, which we've heard more than once today is for more granular information than what is in the presentation. I mean, we designed the presentations as we did because we wanted these meetings to talk about relationships, not to grind on data. And so that's why I chose not to put that level of information out right now. We will put it out in the process. In fact, that's because all that stuff exists. We're using it right now. That's the kind of thing as soon as we can take the time and work through it and put it on a piece of paper and upload it to the web page, we will.
These are the prices that we're using as a model for gas.
Yes. You know, relationship, I think that it's really important to look at the cost per kilowatt hour of renewables versus conventional fuels or fossil fuels. And last night I got a chance to look at some of the information earlier in detail. Looking at the existing history information, this is kind of a follow-up to the question a few minutes ago on fossil fuels. On slide 13, we have the existing system information. I'm looking at the cost per megawatt hour of wind, and the cost per megawatt hour of wind will have down to $27 per megawatt hour. And if I'm reading this correctly, that includes fuel, it includes O&M, and it includes capital costs. What I want to point out is that total cost per wind is far less than even just the fuel cost of fuel resources. You look over in the third column, cost for fuel cases is well over the total cost of the wind. For example, San Juan, the cost for fuel is $34 per megawatt. The fuel for San Juan costs more than the capital cost and the fuel cost and the O&M cost for
Okay, the question was just a comparison of dollar per megawatt hour pricing and walking through slide 13 where we have the cost for existing generation observation that dollar per megawatt hour for New Mexico Wind Energy Center is less than the fuel for some of the other resources. That's true. The price for New Mexico Wind Energy Center is a contract price. It's what we pay. So it's inclusive of the operation and maintenance and the other costs that's on the sheet. One of the things that we hope to communicate well in this IRP is just buying energy at any, and not caring when you buy it matters. I mean, the point is that the wind does not necessarily generate the energy at the time that it's being consumed. So we need a mix of resources. We like the cheap energy that you can get when you can buy wind at that price, but we also need resources on our system to serve peak demands. And so as we go through, our point will be try to illustrate that mix and how things come together.
We're at a point where there's a potential shift in the way away from the traditional utility model. Power supply is becoming more of a commodity, and there's different players coming into the markets, or from insurance companies, banks, to whatever, who are looking to aggregate power in different forms and sell it back under different relationships than we've traditionally seen. Is that factored into your electric power pricing comparison? If so, how's that taken into account?
Not sure I understand the question. The observation that the players in the energy market is an evolving dynamic, that over time you have different entrants, different types of companies are developing energy. And then I think the question is, how is that dynamic captured in what we're doing right now? Is that right?
Similar to that, you're seeing companies that have different financial capabilities and able to approach the acquisition of resources differently. They're able to buy existing resources, repackage them at different prices than we've seen in the past. So we're seeing that happen in the market right now, and it is affecting overall wholesale pricing that's available you go out to price it and purchase it. Is that factored into the base model?
Okay, I'm still struggling to make sure I understand the question. I think the reality is we're nearing a break, so I'm having a hard time understanding it. So I think that's probably what would be a good thing to do now is we'll take a break. I'll talk to Bob on the break, try to figure out what he's talking about, and then we'll start coming out with the answer to Bob's question. I guess before I take a break and let Pace off the phone, just want to see if there's any last questions for them. All right, thanks, and thanks, Pat and the Pace team. We're going to take a break here in the room and be back, let's say, in 10 minutes. We still have a lot to cover this morning, so back at 10:20. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Pat. We'll talk to you later in the day then to follow up.
Thanks, Pat.
All right.
So it did make sense. Well, no, I mean,
Okay, they got it. Go along.
Well, let's do the start. It is
What's going on with this one? It's, I click it, and that one is like, oh, I mean, it does usually. Hey, suspension is being. Yeah, no, I used to know what you mean.
their buying power.
I thought it was
The products that we got.
that's
So what you're asking is, are we able to there's some downward pressure,
including
what you're talking about is the kind of fluctuation. And explain why you thought about that.
Oh, yeah.
I'm hoping you may be able to answer it for me. I think this is an annual cycle.
Yeah.
Whereas more expensive in summer than it would be in winter. Why is this gap during the year greater for a cheap scenario than it is for a scenario?
Oh, next year.
Oh, okay.
Because when you've got renewables, 4 of them, the price is more stable. You know, in here you're drawing on your renewables, but there you're drawing on gas. So you get a big difference between when you've got more renewables in your portfolio, you don't need as much gas. So you're less reliant.
I'm interesting. So what you're saying is the wind and the sun shine at a big cost. It's a big cost throughout the year.
Yeah.
Whereas the gas market is very low for the year. So the more you depend on gas, the more variability. Yeah.
And that's because gas is variable, right? So then
Right.
the variability of gas is going
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Okay, we should try to get started pretty soon here. We still have a bulk of information to go. We're in it now.
Oh, no, I was actually
There you go. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started pretty soon here. Okay, we spent quite a bit of time on the phone with Pace, and I thought that was valuable time. I mean, what they did is it's an important input to our process. It's important for people to understand the relationships between the different variables there. And again, just a reminder, our goal when we went down that road was trying to find price scenarios that would show a good degree of contrast between, you know, the things, the world as it looks today versus potential futures. And we knew that the two big variables would be natural gas and CO2, so that's how we picked the scenarios we did. And so we'll continue to discuss those as we go on. We'll provide the documentation that was requested today in the near future. So what we have remaining this morning is I'm going to talk about just how the demand forecast comes together and give you a look at what we're using right now. I designed this to be a high-level discussion more similar to Tuesday than what we just went through with Pace on their price curves. So I don't think that will take much time. And then we'll go straight from me talking about demand forecasting to Steve Bean talking about how we're projecting the energy efficiency resource going forward. And then we'll take a short break there, and then we'll wrap up with Dean talking about pricing distributions in our analysis. Okay, so to talk about demand forecasting, I'm just going to try to describe what it is and define it. I will discuss the elements of the net system peak that we use in IRP. That's an important piece because we spent a lot of time talking about energy, and we're comparing cost of wind resources to cost of other resources. But another critical thing to maintain system reliability is that we know we have the resources there when we need it, so peak matters. And then we'll talk about just high level how we treat losses within the forecast. And then one of the things that we do in every IRP, we'll show you just currently a comparison of what our actual demands have been to our previous forecasts. Okay, so just demand forecasting in general. PNM develops a demand forecast based on the current load conditions and projected economic data. And then we also we talk to our large customers, so we include not just generally what we think is going on in New Mexico, but some insight specifically for them for our service territory. And we add all those numbers up to come up with a peak demand projection. For planning, we use a weather normalized forecast. So that's something when I get to the comparison of actual to forecasted, you'll see there's variation between what the demand was and what we had predicted. And some of that variation is a result of the summer being hotter or cooler than we had predicted. So when we're doing a demand forecast, we're trying to look at normal weather. For IRP, similar to our price curves, we will use three scenarios. We'll use a mid forecast, a high forecast, and a low forecast. I'll talk a little bit about the kind of assumptions that we're using in that. This is a review mostly for folks who were involved in the last IRP. And similar to the energy prices, the goal on demand forecast scenarios is to have scenarios that are different so that we can see different portfolio builds under different scenarios. And just some basic information about our demand. That we're a summer peaking utility. There are other utilities that the winter is their peak time, but for PNM it's the summer. It occurs June through August on a weekday, usually at around 5 o'clock p.m. The peaks are, as it says here, driven by hot weather. So, average high temperature during that summer period for Albuquerque is 93 degrees. If we're on a peak day, it's going to be 98 degrees or more. And then just for comparison's sake, and this will help when we're thinking through IRP on need for year-round capacity and energy, that our winter peak, which usually happens between December and February, so there's a little bit more variability about when that happens, and it's about 85% of the summer peak. So that number, I think, is a little higher than it was, say, 10, 15 years ago. And that change is a reflection in the way we're using electricity today. So what we have here is a graph. Anticipating your question, Tom, we will supply data in a table. And what we're just showing is how we build these scenarios to try to have a difference between the three when we get to the end state. So the modeling we've done so far is based on the mid. When we get to the Thursday, when we start describing the plan to build out the rest of the IRP, we will be building scenarios around the low and the high. And then the main differences that drive these forecasts are around economic assumptions and demand per customer going forward. So, the low is just an assumption of a continuing trend, that there's a continuing trend of a decline in demand per customer in the near term. Then they have kind of a slow economic recovery about in this time period. And then as the economy picks up, you get a little bit of an increase. And then you'll notice the lines are pretty straight after that. We're getting beyond, where our economic assumptions reach. So from that point on, we just escalate going forward. So just a few metrics on that. The net system peak demand, and again, you'll get tables, so you'll be able to do this yourself. The low demand, we're at about 0.2% per year between 2014 and 2022. And for the mid, we're at 0.4% per year growth. And then for the high, we're at 0.6% per year for growth. And then as you end up with, by the time you get to the end of the period, a difference in the demand of about 150 megawatts, which is the size of one of our larger gas peaking plants. So you do have a big difference in capacity over the planning period using these curves.
Why did they start?
Well, the question is why they start at a different level, and I think this is, first of all, it's an artifact of where we're at the moment. We're trying to build low, so we're starting with dismal economic assumption. So, and then within the IRP, where things really start to matter is when we get out here. So, yeah, there's a discontinuity here. This is something maybe we'll adjust as we go forward through the process, but when I'm looking at it, my goal is to see that there's a difference when we get out here. And so basically this is, say, economic train wreck, but don't necessarily, again, similar to energy pricing, the goal is to have curves that are different, not to predict what's going on directly in our economy there. Yes, Tom?
Well, given the difficulty of forecasting out that far, I'm wondering if the company is considering any flat or declining load.
The question is if we're considering flat or declining load forecast. I mean, the answer is we could, but for this exercise, I don't know how interesting that would be. I mean, because if we're looking at resource optimization over 20 years, if we don't have any growth, then we know we don't have increasing capacity. So then it'll just be a question of balancing of cost going forward, and we can accomplish that with this forecast. The next slide, just to orient you to where we're at, on the Tuesday meeting, we handed out a load and resource table, and one of the lines at the top of the table is net system peak demand, and the line I showed you was the net system peak demand. So this graph just kind of shows a traditional or historic way to think about the electric system, going from a customer all the way through a distribution system up to where you've got big central station power plants. So on our system, the analogy would be, this would be, say, San Juan or Four Corners. These distribution would be the bulk distribution or transmission lines that get from the Four Corners to the Albuquerque area. Distribution system is where we're distributing it around Albuquerque to individual customers. And so there are resources on our system that are in different locations on that string. And so when we're forecasting the net system demand for the planning, we're trying to balance things out basically right here at this point. So if you have a big bulk generator, we're looking at what's the net capability of that generator. If we're looking at P&M solar installations, those are tied to the distribution system. So in order to get back through the system to here, we have to account for what are the losses on the lines. And so in that case, we can avoid some losses because we're only hitting one of the two transmission systems. And then the other side, when we get all the way back to the customer-cited items that are behind the meter, like energy efficiency or customer-cited solar, we'll give them credit for the whole system worth of losses, just so that when we're balancing things out at this point, we've got everything at an equal footing. So the result of that is when you study the demand or the load resources table, you'll see some notes about how losses are treated on there. And that's just something that folks have asked questions about before. I thought it would be worth highlighting that at this point. Okay, so the last slide I have to talk about demand is just our comparison of actual to forecast. And this is a table that will show up in the report when we file it. So I mean, the table can be kind of interesting to think about. Basically in 2006, we were predicting a peak demand for 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So as you move across the sheet this way, you can see how our demand forecast evolves over time for individual years. And then when we're comparing, there's two comparisons over here. This is the actual, and then this is our weather normalized actual. So we take what really happened, and it either goes up for weather normalization, or this is where it goes down for weather normalization. So the comparison to how we did on demand is the weather normalized actual to basically, you want to look at the last box on this string for how we were doing in the short term, and then over the long run you can compare the first box to this here. And so you will see variation. I mean, you'll see years where the forecast was higher than what actually happened. You'll see years where the forecast was lower than what actually happened. So as we work through the IRP, we'll be talking about capacity additions. We'll be talking about system reliability. And one of the ways that we measure, are we able to handle the fact that the load is going to be different than what was forecast, is we have something called a reserve margin on our system. So for years where the actual peak was higher than what we forecast, we do have resources that we can cover that reliably. And I don't have 2013 on here yet because we're still at the preliminary level on the data for this most recent summer. But I think for 13 we'll see that our forecast for the summer peak that our most recent was a little bit low on a weather normalized basis. Okay, the question is whether the peak comes up more from increased use per customer or addition of more customers, is my understanding of what you've asked.
Or is it just that it's hotter? Is there more industry? Are there more people? Are there more energy?
Okay, or other combinations of things like, is it getting warmer, or do we have more industry, more commercial, more residential? And the use per customer is something that we're looking at, and it's been, growing to fairly flat. And actually, I mean, looking at year to year, it changes. So anyway, the increase that we're showing here, I think, is more driven by adding more customers over time. Yes, Steve.
Two questions. First one, pretty simple. Would you rather normalize or you use 30 years or 10 years or some other duration? All chance of that.
Yeah, weather normalization, I don't have that number with me. I think it's 30 years, but Gerard, can you correct me on that? 10 years, I'm sorry. I'm still thinking back to my gas days.
And then the other question, on your demand, going back on a couple of slides, but on your demand projections, are those, you don't consider some of those load management programs or are those
Yeah, the question is on the demand projections, does that assume some level of load management? And where we're at in the process right now, we're assuming that we continue the demand response resources that we do have online right now. That is something that changes. The contracts expire during this period, so we will look at that. And George, you wanted to add something?
That, and correct me if I'm wrong, but our demand forecast don't account for demand response programs. That's the report. That's the release pattern.
Yeah, you're right, Gerard. I mean, when you look at our load and resource table, we've got the top line, and what happens on the top line is accounting for what's happening from demand, energy efficiency, and customer-sited solar. Then because the demand resource programs are dispatchable, those are included in our list of resources. So it isn't buried in the demand number. It's a resource that we can choose to use to meet the peak.
just a comment, it does, I mean, if I look at the, even if you're right here, there's relative demand and capital expenditure, pretty conservative.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment, and like I said, the goal is to see that things are different. So we could go back and look at, historic demand, and I think we'll find we've had the history of higher than we're seeing here. So that's something that we can adjust going forward. And again, the goal is to have something that is sufficiently different. So amping it up is good.
Just want to confirm that on that slide you said it was 0.2, 0.4, and 0.6.
That's just the average annual number there. Yeah. Yes. And I took that by comparing 2022 to 2014. Okay, so I thought it was important to talk about the demand forecast today, first of all, because it'll be important when we're talking about scenario design next Thursday. And then important element in demand forecast is what we're assuming we're going to receive from energy efficiency going forward. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Steve Beam so he can talk about where we're at for the energy efficiency resource, talk about the demand savings that's produced, and then how we're going to be projecting that going forward through this IRP.
Okay, so we're ready for a little lighter topic, no pun intended. First slide. So I'm going to start out this morning with a review of just a few definitions. A lot of people in here today are familiar with energy efficiency, but I thought it'd be good if we're all on the same page. This first slide is extracted definitions from the Efficient Use of Energy Act. For those of you who might not know, the Efficient Use of Energy Act was passed in 2005. It was amended in 2008, and again this year, 2013. It's what governs the development and offering of programs by utilities in the energy efficiency area. I'm sure people are familiar with what an energy efficiency program is. It is any program that saves energy without reducing the quality of service. And PNM, as you'll see, has a number of programs that we currently offer. Load management is also a program under the Efficient Use of Energy Act. It's a different character than energy efficiency. Load management programs don't necessarily save energy, but they do save peak demand. The utility cost test is another definition in the EUEA. It's the primary measurement of cost effectiveness for programs. This is one of the things that changed in 2013. It used to be the total resource cost test. It's now the utility cost test, and it's what we'll be using going forward as we plan new programs to make sure they're cost effective. The Act also defines targets for utilities, and in particular, the targets for savings are in relation to 2005 retail sales. So the first target that we have to meet in 2014 is a 5% savings compared to 2005 sales. The next target is 8% in 2020. And on my next slide, I will quantify what that means for PNM in particular. And then finally, I just want to mention two kinds of savings that we reference in the plan. We talk about gross savings and we talk about net savings. Gross savings are simply the total savings that are achieved through all participants in all of our programs, both energy and demand savings. Net savings, on the other hand, are reduced to account for some participants who would have installed the measures even without our programs. So there's a percentage of energy that's deducted from gross savings, and that is net savings. It is net savings that we report to the Commission every year. It's net savings that apply or can be credited towards meeting the goals identified in the Act. I think I missed a slide. Great. I think we have a question. Steve?
Well, I have a question. For 2014 and 2020 numbers, what are goals or minimum requirements?
Yes, thank you, Steve. The comment here is that when I refer to the what I call goals in the Efficient Use of Energy Act, in fact, what they are minimum targets. and Steve is correct on that. Thank you. This next slide is just a few more definitions that we deal with in the IRP plan itself. Just to be clear, we mentioned demand-side resources. That is simply a combination of all programs, energy efficiency and load management programs. Also, demand response is a type of load management. PNM has a couple demand response programs, and we compensate users to either interrupt or reduce their energy use during peak periods. And then again, as I mentioned, the energy saving goals specifically for PNM are based on our 2005 sales. In 2005, our retail sales were 8,224 gigawatt hours. So the first target for next year is 5% of that, which will be 411 gigawatt hours. And in 2020, it's 8% or 658 gigawatt hours. I think you'll see as we go through here that the plans that we're presenting, projections that we're presenting for energy efficiency, the mid and the low and a high sensitivity all meet these statutory goals. And we have another question. Dave?
Steve, first I want to say that this is a very impressive program. A lot of energy efficiency. So that's my comment. 50% already of your total book. And then I have two questions. One is, the numbers you're presenting actual or predicted? You actually measure them, or and then the second question is, there was actually more information on this program than it turned out from the OPA on the existing system information, and it has a breakdown by different types of programs. I'm just curious why the gas and evaporative cooling number is so low.
Okay, we have two questions. The first question is, as I'm going through the presentation, am I referring to actual savings that have been verified, or are they projected? And so let me handle that question first. As I go through here, and if we just go on to the next slide, there will be several graphs where I present actual results. And by actual, I mean savings that have been reported to the PRC. They have been verified. There's an independent evaluator that's appointed in the state of New Mexico, and programs have been evaluated. And so from that point of view, they are actual savings. Beyond 2012, the data that's being presented obviously is projections. Many of those projections are based on savings per unit that have been already validated by previous evaluations, so they're pretty good projections. The further out you go, of course, becomes more of just a projection.
Another question I have on that previous slide was, 2012, you've got a savings of 79 gigawatt hours, and you're shooting for 411 gigawatt hours in 2014. That seems like a huge jump in 2 years. Is that reasonable?
The question on the floor is, I referred to at one point 79 gigawatt hours of savings last year, 2012, but the goal in 2014, just a short time out, is 411. How are we going to get there? And I will address that, Dave, if I just put it off for a moment, and we'll get right to that question with some of the graphs in a moment. And the second question that was asked refers to some data that was presented in our previous presentation in our summary of the existing system. I think we had a table in there on slide 3. And David, if you could please repeat your question about advanced evaporative cooling, I believe. Right, so the question is on that chart, or on that table on slide 3 of the previous presentation, why advanced evaporative cooling is so low. And I'll answer that in two parts. That program that we're calling advanced evaporative cooling on slide 3 refers to direct indirect cooling. And that has been a very hard sell in the market. So we still have rebates for that technology, but we have not been able to get traction. As you'll see in a minute, going forward, we're proposing another program. Fortunately or unfortunately, has the same name, advanced evaporative cooling, but it refers to a different technology that's more widely accepted, and we think it's going to have a big impact going forward. All right, so this slide, slide 21, shows our current programs. PNM has a large set of programs now, and I won't go through these in great detail, but just to mention, pretty much every year we discount over 1 million CFL bulbs. We're getting ready to, and in fact we're already starting to incorporate discounts for LED lights as that market is changing. We recycle 7,000 or 8,000 refrigerators and old freezers each year. We have incentives for builders to meet Energy Star standards. We distribute free CFLs at low-income events. Approximately 6,000 or 7,000 kits get mailed out to our low-income customers each year to help them save energy. And through our partner MFA, low-income customers can have lighting and refrigerators replaced. We have a comprehensive business program, both for retrofit and new construction, and a special program for our small business customers. And finally, we have 2 demand response programs that have about 30,000 customers participating in that, which Pat referenced earlier. Those are dispatchable programs during our peak periods. Next slide. So in addition to those, we're adding more. In front of the Commission today is a proposal to expand our programs with 6 new offerings. We think that this group of programs is going to put us in a good position to not only meet the 2014 goal, but to expand these programs in the future to help us meet the 2020 goal. There's a new whole house program, which will do a home assessment, have a direct installation of CFLs and programmable thermostats, plus high value rebates for appliances, a low-income version of that, rebates for advanced evaporative cooling and other high-efficiency cooling options, home energy reports, student kits, and a new business offering for tuning up at existing buildings. You can get a lot more information on our current programs at our website, pnm.com/rebates, and this whole program that's been filed is available on our regulatory page on pnm.com if you have specific questions. So the next 3 slides, I just kind of present history of what we've accomplished so far, some short-term projections for the program. This slide, the first one, the blue bars show energy savings per year for the total portfolio. You can see that in 2008 we started out with annual savings of about 35 gigawatt hours. 2012 was a fantastic year for us. We hit 79 gigawatt hours. 2013 and 14, you can see the projections there. 13, we are projecting to be a little lower than last year. One of the reasons, it's not that participation is going down. Participation is about as high or higher than it was last year. But the savings are getting a little more difficult to accomplish. For example, in lighting in particular, I'm sure you're aware that incandescent bulbs are being phased out. And so the baseline for what we can capture is going up. And so you'll see that as we go through this forecast, that's an important factor going forward in predicting energy savings. Yes, Steve?
Your 2014 budget reflects 8% law, revenue.
So the question from Steve Michael is, does our proposed or projected 2014 budget, which I show on this chart on slide 23 to be $22.5 million, does that reflect the 3% of customer bills that is in the EUEA? And the answer to that is no, it does not. This projection for 2014 is based on the plan that's before the Commission now, and the budget is $22.5 million.
How much more would that budget be if it were?
The question is, how much more would that budget be if it was consistent with the 3% level specified in the Efficient Use of Energy Act? As I went forward on developing this preliminary forecast, the target that I was using for the budget is about $26 million. So in 2014, that's approximately what 3% would be. And you'll see in a minute how that's an important consideration as we're going forward with the new plans. And in fact, throughout the planning period, one of the major assumptions is that spending for energy efficiency is at the 3% level every year throughout the planning horizon of this IRP.
Including 2014, I'm just trying to understand. So in your planning, you assume the 22.5 or the 26?
The question is, in the planning for 2014 and thereabouts, did we include the 26 million or the 22.5? And in this projection for 2014, the budget is 22.5 million. It grows in 15 and 16 and gets to the 26 million at that point. I believe it's 2016. Just to elaborate a little bit more on this chart on slide 23, the red line then is just a graph of the budget. It grows from the 8 million in 2008 to the 22.5 we mentioned for 2014. I just want to mention this bottom set of numbers. These are cumulative, and this gets back to the question that was asked earlier about the target in the Efficient Use of Energy Act. So that target is based on what the total energy saved in 2014 due to programs that have been in place since 2007. So, for example, in 2008, people installed motors, AC, whatever, switched out their lighting, etc. Savings that are occurring in 8 are still occurring in 2014. So up through that period, all the numbers are cumulative. And what you see at the bottom is the cumulative savings. And at this point, we're projecting to exceed the minimum target identified in the Act 2014.
So each vertical column there is incremental. Addition to what all previous years.
Yes, good point. The comment is that each bar in this chart represents annual incremental savings, and that's correct. Another question.
One more clarifying question. Your annual budget, is those budgets just for programs or
Question is, does the budget include all costs, including incentives and program costs? And yes, it does. The budget is all-inclusive. It's all P&M's administrative costs, third-party costs, which we use a lot of third-party contractors to implement these programs, plus all of the rebates and incentives that are paid. If you mean customer incentives.
No, I meant utility incentives.
Okay, there's a clarification. Does this budget include utility incentives? And no, it does not. What's presented today is program-related costs. Okay, if we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so the previous slide just showed energy. This is a similar slide showing the demand savings that we've accomplished through 2012 and that are predicted through 2013 and 2014. This particular slide does not include the impact of demand response. I'll show that in the next slide, which is really where the large capacity or demand numbers are. I just want to mention that, before we go to that, just want to mention that each energy efficiency program has a unique demand profile. So, for example, residential lighting saves a large amount of energy, but the capacity that you get or the demand impact that you get is small relative to the energy, because obviously we're talking off-peak energy savings compared to on-peak savings. So what this shows is the total impact of all the programs during the peak period. Okay. And then this slide is the summary of the demand response program. I did add a couple extra years on the end of this chart, and the reason it goes out a little further here is just to show that we are predicting some growth out to about 2017. After that period, it stays at 65 megawatts throughout the planning process at this point. These are very mature programs. We had a lot of growth at the beginning of the program through 2010, but as I'm sure some of you participate in this program, and you know how it was used this past summer. It's dispatched it very aggressively. This summer, I think we had 5 or 6 days in a row, and it was during those times when it was over 100 degrees. So what happens over time is we do get a lot of churn in the program. It's not perfect for everyone. We get people that drop out of the program. So a lot of our effort in recruiting new customers is just replacing the capacity that was there. So we see them as the good side, or the positive side of this is that we now have a very firm or a very dependable resource. It's important in our system operations. But as far as growth, we don't see a lot of growth happening over the next several years in this program. But it does continue as an important resource, as Pat mentioned, in our planning process.
Why don't you see a lot of growth?
So the question is, why don't we see a lot of growth? We have 2 programs, Power Saver, what we call Power Saver and Peak Saver. Power Saver is for residential and small businesses. That program reduces air conditioning use during our peak times. In order to participate in that program, you have to have a refrigerated air conditioning unit. That's where the capacity, where you can get the capacity. And in New Mexico, as I'm sure you know, we still have about 70% of our customers that have evaporative cooling. That's changing. There's a lot of pressure to go to refrigerated air, and that is happening. But over time, we have, I believe, contacted just about every owner of a refrigerated air conditioning unit. If you haven't been contacted, let me know, because we're always looking for new customers. So for that program, we're basically saturated. I should just mention another thing that happened here over time is, as we did reach saturation on that, we signed up more and more apartment complexes. Apartment complexes, the units are much smaller. And so not only are we getting dropouts on a regular basis, but the amount of capacity we're getting from each unit has been going down. So that's basically why we're kind of saturated at this point. We still see some growth, but a lot of that growth is going to be replacing people that leave the program. Yeah, sorry. And then there was another program. There is one other program for our large commercial customers, and really, it's almost the same kind of situation there. We have targeted pretty much everybody that we can think of, and we continue to reach out to our customers to participate in the program. It's a similar situation. You're using this program on the hottest days of the year in the summer. many commercial customers cannot participate in that and have their air conditioning cut or lowered to some extent during that. So it's a struggle also in the commercial side.
What about government being a big user? Big government, I mean, they should have alignment with this kind of goal of energy efficiency. Is that an opportunity?
Question is since government buildings and so forth use a lot of energy, shouldn't they also be aligned with this policy of reducing energy and perhaps participate in these programs? I think we do have government. In fact, yes, I can't really mention specific customers who are in this, but I do know that there are government entities that participate. Again, they have the same kind of issues as to whether they can or can't participate. Can their systems and their operations accept turn down of their air conditioning and other equipment during these hottest days or not? It's really a very site-specific question.
We got a question from the webinar.
Okay, I think we have a question from a webinar participant.
The question is there a potential to increase incentives and get more participation in the peak saver or power saver while maintaining cost effectiveness?
Yeah, so the question is whether we could increase incentives in the demand response programs to help increase participation and still remain cost effective. And yes, I think that is an option. We're always looking at that. It's a possibility that we, in fact, we have made some adjustments in the past in terms of rebates and so forth for all our programs, and we will be looking at that going forward. Another question?
I have two questions. Sorry. The first is, what do you assume about penetration of new buildings, new residential, commercial, industrial? Do you assume that? What's your assumption about the capture of the?
Okay. Yes. The question is, how do we incorporate a forecast for new buildings and new customer basically new buildings in participation in load management. That is anticipated. It is small compared to the existing stock, especially in recent years. Housing has not been a large factor in growth. And in addition to that, I mentioned we have about 30,000 customers in the Power Saver program. Churn is significant, and even with growth, a lot of the new customers we're getting are just replacing customers that have left. And your second question?
Yeah, the second question, and I'm sure there's a neat explanation for it. The savings achievements are commendable, and looking at the demand savings table, I think that's slide 4. Oh, I'm sorry. No, we're on the demand response. So the demand response, slide 25. The 2012 capacity savings was 57.4 megawatts. Is that right?
Yes, the capacity was 57 megawatts in 2012. Yes.
And this may be a question for Patrick or somebody else, but looking at the load resources table that was handed out on Tuesday, the demand response starts at 48 in 2013 and never climbs to about 54 megawatts. I'm wondering what.
You want to? I can partially answer that, Pat, or would you like? I'll start and hand this off to Pat. As I mentioned earlier, and as shown on the top of this slide 25, these are the demand savings in this case that are reported to the PRC, and they're evaluated. These are the peak savings that we get from the program. As far as planning and in the models that go forward, there is an integration of the capacity over time that is plugged into the model, and that reduces somewhat the peak capacity that is used in the modeling. Pat, is that correct?
What do you mean by integration?
So the question is, what do I mean by integration? If you look at the whole summer period, all all of the hours during the peak period over the summer and look at the capacity from that perspective. Instead of just the peak hour, it is slightly lower capacity. Okay, we can move to the next slide. All right, getting into the actual projections then going forward, longer term projections, I just wanted to lay out here on this slide, 26, some of the key assumptions going forward, and some of these we've already touched on. The first one is that historically we've been filing plans, new program plans every 2 years. The assumption going forward is we'll continue to do that. Our current filing is before the Commission. It was filed in October. The next filing then would be October of 2014. The number 2, the Efficient Use of Energy Act now provides a consistent target for energy efficiency spending at 3% of customer bills. So that becomes a very major assumption going forward. We know fairly closely what our spending is going to be going forward. That spending then will, on number 3, will increase, assuming that P&M revenues increase at the same rate every year. Energy savings projections then become a function of the program design and the cost of achieving new savings. So for example, then number 5, the cost of achieving new savings we know is going up over time. We've harvested a lot of the least expensive options, such as lighting. Over time, it costs more money to get the next increment of savings. So, for example, at number 6, we assume for the 2014 RFP a mid case on the escalation rate, and the escalation rate on cost that we've assumed is 4.5%. My next slide has some comparison of some other values for that. In other words, the cost of achieving savings on a per kilowatt hour basis will go up at 4.5%. We then take a high and low sensitivity case where we assume that we're wrong on that escalation rate, that it's either higher or lower, and that leads to the 2 sensitivities. And then finally, demand response, as Pat mentioned, we continue that program as a resource through the plan. Questions?
Yeah, what's the basis for the 4.5% cost escalation?
The question on the webinar, in fact, we just leave it on this slide, slide 27. The webinar question is, what's the basis for the 4.5%? So on slide 27, I do show a couple other sources of cost data. Of course, what we want to use, as is true for the other assumptions in the IRP, is local experience and local projections. So what you see on this chart on slide 27, the red line is the mid-case projection of costs per kilowatt hour, and that is total program cost divided by the first year savings. The first few years, 2008 through 2012, are obviously actual costs per kilowatt hour, and then after that it's the projection. And so the red line shows the impact of a 4.5% escalation over time. There is some variability in the first few years from that 4.5%, like, for example, through about 2016, 2017. That is because we're much more confident about what the costs are at that period due to the fact we filed this new plan and we have a better handle of what the actual costs will be. The other 2 lines on this chart, getting to the webinar question, shows some data that's been extracted from a couple public reports. Energy efficiency potential study that was done for the state of New Mexico in 2011, and a report that was produced by SWEEP, Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, last year. those two lines are shown as far as cost per kilowatt hour by the green line and the blue line. So I guess to answer the question, the escalation rate that we're assuming 4.5% is based more on our local experience of program cost, tempered by looking at what other folks are projecting in the in this area. And I guess that what this chart shows is that it's highly variable. Hence the need for high and low scenarios going forward.
And then the follow-up was, is that EE only, or is it EE and demand response programs, the total program?
Right. The question is, does this represent energy efficiency costs, or does it include demand response? And the answer is it is the total program cost for P&M, which includes demand response and energy efficiency. That's a question, Dave.
My initial reaction on this chart is the numbers are very high. I'm used to seeing opportunities for energy efficiency that pay back in often less than a year, many less than 10 years. And what I'm seeing here, even starting at 2008, 2010, your cost per kilowatt hour is more than the cost that consumers are paying per kilowatt hour. And so I'm wondering if we're achieving cost effectiveness here.
Right. So the question is that these, the comment in question, first, that these costs seem rather high in the 20-30% or cost cents per kilowatt hour range compared to what's been seen for energy efficiency at a much lower cost. And the answer there, Dave, is that for purposes of this chart, comparing costs, it is the first year program cost divided by just the first year of savings. So the actual cost of energy efficiency would have to include the lifetime of savings that you get from each of the programs, which in many cases extends for 9 or 10 years, which would be about a tenth of the cost then. So if you really want to see the actual cost, you roughly divide these numbers by 10.
So then that leads me to a follow-up question, which is what I would like to see is a comparison of various sources of energy, whether it be coal or gas, nuclear or wind or energy efficiency, comparing on the same chart in cost per kilowatt hour basis to see what the most cost-effective technologies are.
The comment and request is that we provide a chart or a table that would show cost per kilowatt hour comparison between energy efficiency as a resource and other traditional, compared to other traditional resources. I think that's probably something that we would certainly look at providing that going forward. Yes, another question. The question is, if I understand it correctly, is if we're saving energy through energy efficiency, then aren't we not producing it, therefore, or rather, perhaps we still are producing it, but we're selling it. And so let me just answer that by saying what the forecast, the impact of the energy efficiency forecast is to reduce, going forward, the energy and demand forecast that P&M has. Therefore, as we're going forward, EE is factored into the projection for our load and resources. Therefore, the actual load and resources are less going forward, so you don't have to build or account for resources due to energy efficiency.
Right, but if
So I think I'm not sure I'm quite following the request, but it's to integrate savings that we achieve through energy efficiency by not producing the electricity. And we can certainly think about that and perhaps talk to you more about that going forward. I think that, so the comment on the floor is perhaps, Camila, we can deal with that in a little more detailed fashion in our next meeting. Thank you. Okay, I know we're under time constraint here. I really want to kind of get through the last couple slides. I think we'll go to the next slide at this point. And I'm just going to pass over this. This kind of, you can look at this on your own. It shows where savings might be coming from for new programs going forward. Finally, the last two slides are the actual projected forecast for EE on energy and demand. The first slide is energy, the second one is demand. The green line represents the mid case, our most likely scenario. Again, all of these lines show actual same level of spending going forward on the programs. The only difference is in the escalation rate of costs, which affects how much energy you can get from a given amount of spending. The mid case and the low case are more or less the same up to about 2020, and that's because we do have pretty good confidence on the costs in the near term for these programs. We do think, however, in the high case that there is a potential that we get much higher participation in the programs or they expand much more rapidly, we can deliver them more cost effectively. So there is an upside potential for the savings, which is why the red line diverges earlier on this chart. And then over time, as costs go up, it gets harder to achieve the savings with the same amount of spending. You do have a decline in the out years. So, and then the final chart is the demand is similar. It has a different profile, but the three cases are the same. And that is my last slide.
Well, thanks, Steve. Just looking at time budget, one of the goals here is to be respectful of everyone, and so one of the ways to do that is respectful of your time. So we still had another presentation planned for today, so sorry, Dean, we're not going to get to that today. Yeah, and Dean is available to talk about it right now if you want to talk to me, but we'll bring that presentation probably, I'll look at my time budget for the next meeting, and we'll either include it in the next meeting or a subsequent meeting. So just review and wrap up of what we've done today is went through some important things, important topics in the IRP planning process. One is the curves that we're using for gas and carbon prices. Both of those are important because, as we talked about today, they affect the cost of generation going forward, and the cost is one of the key things that drives our belief of what we want to do and will help inform our plan going forward. During the discussion, got a lot of good discussion about, I hope that there's better understanding of what the price curves, how they were developed, what the goal to put them together was. Got requests for more data. We will get with Pace and respond to those requests. We discussed demand forecast, which at this point it is, I showed you what we're using right now. We will provide more information of that as the process goes forward, and that was more of a preview of something we're going to talk about next Thursday, which is design of the rest of the IRP. And then we also talked about our energy efficiency resource. So, a lot of information. It was pretty dense stuff. Thank you for bearing with us through that. As always, as you think about stuff after the meetings, you can send your questions in on the email. And then just a preview for what we're planning to do next Thursday. Again, another meeting, similar format, similar time, same place. The agenda for that, we will spend some time just talking about what we've heard over yesterday or Tuesday and today, and to the extent that we can get it pulled together by then, we'll provide the data and responses that were requested. We'll be presenting a list of other scenario combinations that we're intending to run for the IRP, and we can have a discussion around that to make sure we've looked at boundaries in a sufficiently large potential future world so that we can understand our risks. And then just a wrap-up discussion and talk about what kind of meetings we're going to have and what frequency we're going to have coming out of here. So we'll give you the schedule of what P&M is going to be doing over the next few months, and we'll talk about how that fits within IRP and start looking for dates for the next batch of meetings. So are there any questions, just lingering questions right now? But
at what point do we have an opportunity to introduce alternatives to what you're considering? Is that part of the discussed IRP work plan?
Yeah,
replacement for San Juan specifically.
Okay, the question is, at what point do you have the opportunity to provide other ideas or other questions? And the answer to that is the opportunity is open right now. If we want to talk about relationships or ideas, this is a good forum to do it. If you have a lot of data, a large proposal, a good way to do it is to send it in on the email, and we'll talk about it. You know, what we saw in the email, and how it fits with what we've done so far. So anyway, you have the opportunity today if you'd like to take it, and we could talk about a high level right now, or again, you could summarize what you're thinking and send it in, and we'll look at it.
I would like to know what scenarios you're considering so we can discuss it.
Okay, so if you want to look at scenarios, that is what this means. IRP work plan to complete the process. So we're building a map of scenarios we're going to run after this, and so we'll share that and discuss it on Thursday. Yes. It is always my goal to get that kind of stuff out in front of the meeting because I think the meeting's better. So, and frankly, probably what we'll end up doing is emailing it to the IRP emailing list, because I think that'll be a more. I've been trying to post things up on the web page because large files, thought it would be friendlier to people's inboxes, that type of thing, more permanent record. So we will get it on the web page, but I can get it to you quicker if I email it. So that's likely how you'll get it. I appreciate you coming, and again, we covered, we were talking at the break that we're in it now, so if you were wondering when IRP gets started, I think we got a good idea of the complexity and the detail and the number of issues that we're trying to balance and consider as we move forward. Again, as always, I thank you for coming, and thank you for your participation.
Yeah.